Steven Crowder visited the University of Oklahoma. He set up his trademark Change My Mind table and challenged the student body to defend the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, better known as SNAP. The SNAP program provides food benefits to more than 41 million low-income Americans, and Crowder wants to end it. His argument rests on several claims: that SNAP doesn't work, that it is riddled with fraud, that recipients are people who don't want to work, and that taxpayers should not subsidize groceries for people he considers lazy. He also focused heavily on the fact that SNAP benefits can be used to purchase soda and other snack foods.
I'm at my wit's end. I'm fed up with this. The more I look into SNAP, my position on this is end SNAP completely, outright, wholesale. If we want something like food stamps for bare necessities, create a separate program. It's so beyond repair and so corrupt. I think in 2025, done with SNAP. If you disagree, you're welcome to change my mind.
So let's evaluate each of these claims using actual data and the available reporting. Does SNAP work? It depends on what you mean by work. If the goal is to help low-income households purchase food, SNAP is extremely effective. The program is used by roughly 88% of those who are eligible. It reduces food insecurity for millions. The program lifts 2 to 3 million people out of poverty annually. It improves infant birth weights. It reduces the likelihood that adults will skip necessary medications. It leads to long-term improvements in children's cardiovascular and metabolic health, and children who grow up with SNAP are more likely to graduate high school. If you're not into helping other people, SNAP generates an estimated $1.54 in GDP for every federal dollar spent on the program. A dollar goes in, $1.54 comes out. By every major metric used by economists and public health researchers, SNAP achieves the core objective it was designed for. It feeds people, stabilizes families, and supports the local economies. Is there fraud? Yes. No large-scale federal program can operate with zero fraud. SNAP is a $100 billion per year program serving 42 million people. Some improper payments are inevitable. About 10% of SNAP expenditures are considered improper. This category includes both administrative mistakes leading to overpayments and intentional fraud. The main intentional crime is retailer trafficking. That's when a store illegally exchanges EBT credits for non-food goods. So I go into a department store and the retailer takes $500 EBT dollars from me and I leave with $300 worth of clothes. But these crimes do not go unchecked. According to the USDA Office of the Inspector General, between 2015 and 2024, investigators closed 1,181 cases, secured 2,192 convictions, filed 1,857 indictments, and collected $514.7 million in fines. The real challenge is balancing timely distribution of benefits with fraud prevention. Perfect security would slow the program to a crawl. Perfect speed would open the door to abuse. Striking the middle ground is an ongoing administrative task. Ending the program is not a solution. It's simply abandoning tens of millions of people in need. Do SNAP recipients work? Steven frequently suggests they do not. It's one of his main talking points that hardworking people shouldn't have to pay for non-working people.
So working class Americans with kids not on SNAP struggling are paying to make other people fatter. How can we have a country with that? That's what I say, cut it, give out a few food stamps for a period of time, a few months until you get back on your feet. Otherwise, get your ass to work.
But a lot of people on SNAP do work, and a lot of people on SNAP can't work. Over half of SNAP recipients are children, seniors, or are disabled. Among the remaining adults, a significant portion are employed. In fact, 55% of SNAP households with children have earned income. Many recipients work part-time, seasonal, or unstable jobs, often because their employers keep hours low to reduce labor costs. Major U.S. companies with high SNAP participation among their workforce include Walmart, Amazon, McDonald's, Kroger, and Starbucks, and the list goes on. All of these corporations have both high percentages of employees who are part-time and high percentages of employees who are on SNAP. And this video isn't exactly about this, but it is kind of about this, so I must digress. Here is a list of the salaries of the CEOs of the previously mentioned companies and the company's stock stock performance over the past 10 years. McDonald's CEO Chris Chimpinski made $18.2 million in 2024, and stock shares have had a return of approximately 397% over the past 10 years. Starbucks CEO Brian Niccol made $95.8 million in 2024, and stocks have had a return of approximately 72% over the past 10 years. Kroger CEO Rodney McMullen made $15.6 million in 2024, and stock shares have had a return of approximately 120%. The major shareholders for all three of these companies are the Vanguard Group and BlackRock. These companies alone have made over $10 billion from just these three companies in the past 10 years. The value of Vanguard's assets under management is roughly $10.1 trillion, and the value of BlackRock's assets under management is approximately $13.46 trillion. Next up, Walmart CEO Doug McMillon made $27.41 million in 2024, and stock shares have had a return of approximately 536% over the past 10 years. The largest shareholder is the Walton family, who have a combined net worth of $432 billion. And finally, Amazon. Amazon CEO Andy Jassy made $40.1 million in 2024, and stock shares have had a return of approximately 709% over the past 10 years. The largest shareholder is Jeff Bezos, who has a net worth of roughly $260 billion. And again, just within these 5 companies, there are hundreds of thousands of employees who are so poor they have to depend on the government for their grocery money. Moving on, the junk food argument. Crowder objects strongly to the fact that SNAP benefits can be used to purchase soda or snack foods.
You can get Halloween candy on SNAP, which I think is immoral and I think is ridiculous.
I personally think Steven is being a huge prick about the Halloween candy, but there is a discussion to be had about soda pop. A lot of these SNAP benefits go to kids, and public health experts agree kids shouldn't drink a lot of soda pop. Where I land on it is fuck all that. I think life is hard, being poor is even harder, and they deserve a treat. And I also think if you're going to give them money, it shouldn't come with a bunch of unnecessary conditions. Steven is right when he says that poor people eat more junk food and they have higher rates of obesity as a demographic, and that poor people on SNAP have higher rates of obesity than poor people not on SNAP. But Steven greatly exaggerates just how much junk food they eat. In truth, only about 20 cents of every EBT dollar is used on junk food, and 80 cents of every EBT dollar is used on staples. And SNAP recipients only buy slightly more junk food than every other income class. So at the store, someone on SNAP's cart's gonna look just about the same as everyone else's cart. And then Steven makes this cruel and ridiculous point.
First off, not everyone deserves treats. Second, for me, it's pretty simple. You pay, you choose. I pay, the taxpayer, I choose. Milk, eggs, meat, produce, and fabric softener. Otherwise, get to work. Is that fair?
No.
No? That's not fair?
There should be some choice in that.
He thinks because he's a taxpayer, he gets to decide what people on SNAP eat. Again, he fails to recognize that people on SNAP also pay taxes, or they're little kids, or they're the elderly and the disabled. But this did give me an idea, because a lot of Steven's food comes from farms that are subsidized with tax money. That food gets to the store using roads that are maintained with tax money. That food gets to the store and it's not poisonous or contaminated because of regulatory bodies that are funded with tax money. And I'm a taxpayer, so I think I should get to decide what Steven eats.
And you're not gonna like it?
The reason I've labeled this cruel is because Steven's theory behind cutting benefits is that it will ultimately do the poor communities good by forcing them to be industrious. And this is not a new idea. It has that Ayn Rand, Thomas Sowell flavor to it, where the privileged and the exceptional don't realize they are privileged and exceptional. And there really aren't any examples in history that I could find of societies where capitalism was king and there was no social safety net, which then resulted in a net positive outcome for everyone. But there are some examples of this model being horrible for poor and middle class people. Like, for example, the Gilded Age in America. Between about 1870 and 1901, the wealth of the nation had consolidated into the hands of the few, and the only social safety nets were the little that churches and charities could provide to the sick and the hungry masses. By 1900, the richest 1% of Americans controlled 50% of the wealth, and the bottom 40% owned 0%. During the 1890s, roughly 100,000 people died per year from malnutrition-related causes. families. Child mortality rates were as high as 25% in some districts. In New York, it was reported by school medical inspectors that, on a typical day, 15 to 25% of students came to school hungry. Adjusted to today's dollars, here's a list of the wealthiest people of the Gilded Age. John D. Rockefeller, $400 billion. Andrew Carnegie, $300 billion. The Vanderbilts, $225 billion. The Astor family, $160 billion. Marshall Field, $100 billion. And J.P. Morgan, whose personal wealth was about $80 billion, but who controlled about $1.4 trillion of the country's wealth. And hey, those numbers look pretty familiar. And I think Stephen's idea that if we take away welfare from the poor so that they will get to work is cruel, because he is willfully ignoring that millions of people in this country already work for Fortune 500 companies and they still have to rely on SNAP. So, starve them out until they start working is a creed that is as idiotic as it is mean. Okay, so now let's talk about the event itself and the special guest. This guy. Overall, this was a massive dud, at least based on the 40 minutes of debate that was released on YouTube. And this was a Turning Point USA event, and judging by this, they are seriously struggling to replace Charlie Kirk. Here's what was in the video. The first two conversations are edited down, and both of the people made the same bad whataboutism point that we give a lot of money to Israel and Ukraine, so why not SNAP?
You can't have Coca-Cola, you can't have candy, you can't have a nice meal for your family.
You absolutely shouldn't have Coca-Cola or candy if you don't work. The $3 billion to Israel that we should also cut has nothing to do with it. It's less than a 50th.
I just think we should solve all of those other extraneous problems before we start telling American citizens we can't have nice luxuries.
Then, finally, a woman sits down to have a real conversation about SNAP. And this is where we got all of our clips for this video, because Stephen finally explains why he thinks SNAP should be ended. The reason we got to hear so much from Stephen is because, unfortunately, the woman he was talking to, who was clearly there to advocate for SNAP recipients, got a pretty bad case of stage fright and couldn't articulate her thoughts, which led to Stephen's soapboxing.
Let me give you some context. So I come from Adair County, Oklahoma. When I was growing up, it was the #1 poorest county we've moved up in the world, and now we're the 3rd poorest. I'm a Cherokee citizen. Cherokee Nation is very prevalent in my little bitty town. Even with Cherokee Nation, we still we still depend on SNAP.
Yeah. Why?
Yes. Because it's a very rural, very small town, and we have a lot of small jobs that pay minimum wage, so people are not able to afford rent and eat. Sorry, I'm shaking.
No, that's okay. By the way, it's okay. I still get nervous all the time every time I do this. Let me, if this helps you, let me present you my position.
Okay.
And then, for the final conversation of the video, which took up 18 minutes of the 40 minutes produced, Stephen interviewed a furry in costume. And this really demonstrates that Crowder and Turning Point USA are nothing more than propagandists. Was this guy here to talk about SNAP? No, he was there because the president of the University of Oklahoma's Turning Point USA chapter asked him to be there and asked him to wear his costume and told him he could talk about furry stuff and not SNAP. He is a plant, which is likely nothing new for a Turning Point USA event.
I mean, I don't know much about this topic, so I would not, I prefer not to give any comment. At least when they invited me here, they said it was mostly going to be about like the...
Okay, so Twister...
I only wore it here today because I was asked by the president to bring it.
Okay.
They reached out to me a few days ago asking if I was interested in coming down, and I was very hesitant.
The president of what?
Turning Point USA's OU chapter.
Oh, okay, so they asked you to.
Yeah.
So are you involved with them?
No.
No.
And boy, did this blow up in their faces. This dude's name is Twistle, and his interests are geology and meteorology. So his name is a combination of Twister and Crystal. And that's nerd shit. No offense, Twistle, I'm a nerd myself. And why is Twistle there if it's not to talk about SNAP? It's because the people at Turning Point assumed, much like Stephen assumes, that being a furry is predominantly a sexual activity. So they thought Stephen, with his boilerplate arsenal against furries, would be able to chew this guy up and make some great shorts for the internet. But they fucked up because Twistle isn't a furry for sexual reasons at all. So he won't be taking the furry sex is normal stance that Stephen loves to attack. In fact, he gives Stephen basically nothing to work with. Early in the conversation, Twistle says he doesn't take part in the sexual aspect of the community.
Are you one of these people you've discussed, or what percentage of your community would you say also have some type of sexual proclivity or it being included in their identity as a furry?
So I can't say any number because
Okay.
I honestly don't know, but I do know people that do have that side.
Yeah.
For me, I choose to stay away from it for the most part in terms of art, the costume.
But Steven really wants this guy to be some kind of pervert.
Well, wait, for the most part. So that means you probably experimented a little bit with some of the sex stuff.
I have friends that are into that side, and I pretty much stay away from it.
What is, you keep saying pretty much. You have like an experience early on in college or something like that?
Yeah.
Again, no one will know.
I've never had any kind of experiences with the costume, and
Okay.
I do not want to.
You don't want to?
Partly because this is extremely expensive. Don't want to get it dirty.
Okay. It is a messy endeavor.
So I definitely stay away from not safe for work side.
Steven presses on. He tries to make the point that because the LGBTQ community are intertwined with the furry community, then being a furry is an outward display of sexuality, which many people think is degenerate behavior.
Let me ask you, what type of intersect do you think there's with like LGBTQ? Because a lot of people think, it's now just a modern expression of gender. And I will tell you this, a lot of people view it as degeneracy when it's an expression of gender or sexuality, because those things should be kept in private.
There is a significant proportion of the fandom that is LGBTQ. What they do is not my business, so can't really comment too much on that.
Yeah, but what if the furry community is seen as sort of a quasi-ambassadorship of LGBTQ, because it's all about breaking down societal norms, gender norms, healthy approach to human interaction. And I'm going to tell you, I don't love it. I think we want to do a costume party, but I think walking around in society where people have to adapt to it is uncomfortable, and I do think it's pretty abnormal.
Well, let me say this.
Do you understand that,
yeah.
though? Yeah.
Furries generally do not just walk around this in their everyday life.
Isn't it incumbent upon you to say, no, that's kind of degenerate to try and thrust a sexual preference like this into the public spotlight?
I'll say what most cases of that happening are in a private setting. Whatever they do is not my business, and so I would just leave it to them to do whatever.
These clips demonstrate who's really obsessed with the sexual side of furries. It's guys like Steven who go looking for this kind of thing, and then they bemoan that the LGBTQ and furry people are trying to corrupt society. Crusaders like Steven are the ones who scour social media accounts and go to parades and conventions looking for these people so they can be outraged. In other words, Steven Crowder starts thinking about exotic and likely very hardcore sexual things when he sees a person in an animal costume.
Well,
Some of the
no,
sex stuff.
Then Steven says it's associated with the destruction of heteronormative behavior.
Right, but it's associated with, the destruct. You know this, right? I don't want to talk in circles on it. The destruction of heteronormative sexual behavior.
Imagine what sort of perversions are running through Steven's mind as he sits across from this non-sexual crystals and weather enthusiast.
Well,
Some of the
no,
sex stuff.
Steven then explains how these images that won't go away got into his head. He says he accidentally took his kids to a cosplay convention and he saw some sexy outfits and he freaked out.
I ended up accidentally at WeebCon. Does that ring a bell? You know what that is?
I do not.
Oh my gosh. I was going to an Easter thing at Gaylord Hotel, and it wasn't Easter, it was WeebCon, and by the third S&M Spider-Man / furry, I was like, I hit the fire exit with my kids.
Here's some pictures of WeebCon and it looks pretty tame to me. Then he says every time he goes on X, he sees some sexual furry content.
But they see the freaky stuff, right? Why do you think that's always on public display? Why do you think if I go on X or Instagram, there's always some weird quasi-sexual energy with the furry community? And how accepting do you think that Americans should be of that?
I went on X and I had to look hard for any sexual furry content, but I guess my algorithm is tuned differently than Steven's. Steven again tries to make the point that when people see furries, they think of sex.
What I would say is, if something like that is happening out in public, it's more likely to make the news. For example, I'll tell you.
Well, no. But if they do it in private, but then they're dressed as a furry in public, people are going, oh, well, that's one of those people because they've made their identity being a furry, and that also is part and parcel of their sexual identity.
Yeah,
right?
I would say that's where that misconception of everybody does it because it's a sexual thing comes from.
Anyway, Twistle sets him straight again, and then he tells him about a cool thing he did as a furry.
Like, for example, whenever I was at a convention in Dallas, I did a presentation on how to find your own crystals. I had about 80 or so people show up. I had about 100 crystals on display. I gave away half of them. Everybody left home with one. And it was strictly educational, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
I had a really awesome time. People learned about rocks. I got to talk about what I was passionate about for an entire hour to a group of people that had no idea what that was beforehand.
That's right. Not only did Twistle say that he only wears his costume on occasion, and that a lot of the conversation during those meetups is about how neato the costumes are, he also says that one of the coolest things he's done as a furry is giving a presentation about crystals. It's beautiful. Twistle ends the conversation by turning the knife into Steven's guts. And I fucking love this part. Twistle tells Steven that most furry conventions raise money for charity, and that he was personally a part of one that raised over $100,000 for a shelter for senior dogs. Look at how it pains Steven to hear that furries are doing something undeniably excellent for the community.
Furry conventions in general are actually one of the best things for local charities. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but usually every convention will be raising money for some kind of charity. For example, one convention I attended in Pittsburgh of 2024 actually raised about $100,000.
That's great.
Over that for a local, I believe it was a shelter for senior dogs.
Okay.
And every year they do different ones, do different charities usually within the area.
Cool.
These things raise tens of thousands of dollars.
All right.
That's it. If you like that, here's something similar. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you're feeling generous, become a patron and a globalist for life. My name is Greb Kared, your ally in the fight against disinformation.